In this video, we're going to put together the user interface for selecting our avatar. So, when we select our avatar, we'll be able to select it from one of two different places. Either the camera itself, meaning take a new picture, or from an existing image that is on your device. In addition, I also want to enforce that all avatars are square. So we'll be able to, we're going to put in some logic to allow the user to crop their image so that it becomes square. So in this video, we're going to basically see a couple of cool different things. Like, we're going to be able to see how we can launch the camera intent to allow the built-in camera application to take a picture, as well as allowing us to select a picture from an existing application. And as far as cropping goes, we're not going to be implementing that ourselves. We're going to be using an open source component provided to us by SoundCloud, of all people, that will handle the cropping logic for us. But that'll be a great way to show you guys how we can interact with different third-party libraries and import them into our application and use them. So I guess let's just go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and open up my resource layout activity profile XML file, because I want to point out I want the whole process of selecting your avatar to happen if you click on the avatar itself or if you click on that tap to change button. So no matter where you hit that, I want the process of selecting our avatar to start right there. So to do that, I'm going to add a click handler to my text view right here, my profile change avatar, as well as my activity profile avatar. Furthermore, I am going to want to add in the logic to hide my activity profile avatar progress frame when the activity starts. So I guess we can go ahead and get started. Opening up our activities package, we can locate our profile activity. And we already have our onYura_create method, and as you see, the only logic we really have here is it switching between a tablet and a phone view. What I'm going to do up here, though, at the top, is I'm going to initialize a couple, or not initialize, but declare some fields that we're going to be needing in this video. The most obvious fields that we're going to need are going to be our private image view avatar view, as well as our private view avatar progress frame. Now, I'm just doing private view avatar progress frame, even though this is a frame layout. And the reason I'm doing that is because a view can be shown or hidden. We don't need to be very specific about what kind of class it is, because we have all the functionality we need in the view itself. However, there's going to be another entry that I need to have in here, and that is our temp image file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say private file. Now, for the private file that I'm going to use, as far as which class, I'm going to be using the one that comes out of the java.io package. And so what is a file? Well, a file is kind of an interesting concept in Android and in Java, where a file is just sort of this idea of a directory or a specific file. You don't think of a file as an open stream reader, for example, or anything like that. It's not an open stream, it's not anything like that. It's just this sort of concept of a file that we can act upon inside of our code, whether or not that particular file or directory exists. Now, I'm going to go ahead and call this file our temp output file. And what this file represents is this file is going to be used in our application when we, for example, take a picture. So if we take a picture, that file has to be stored somewhere on our device temporarily while we do things like crop it, and then after we crop it, we're going to have to store it somewhere temporarily, and then when we upload it to the servers, we're going to have it stored somewhere temporarily. And that is what our temp output file is going to point to. It's going to point to, well, our temp output file. Now, I'm not going to worry about, or I'm not going to keep everything in memory because that would be really inefficient. Instead, we are going to basically be writing out our image to a temporary file every step of the way, and then when we reach the end of the process and the web request has been made to update our image, we will then delete the temp output file. Okay, so let's go ahead and initialize our fields. So the first couple fields are, well, I guess let's just go down the line. Avatar view is going to simply be set to cast to image view find view by ID r.id profile avatar. Our avatar progress frame is going to be set to find view by ID r.id avatar progress frame, and our temp output file is going to be set to. So this is interesting. The syntax again will look a little weird. Because you might think, oh, you're creating a new file, when I'm not creating a new file. But I'm going to say new file, and you'll notice that there's a handful of constructors I can use. I'm going to be using the top one, the file directory and the string name. So I'm going to be specifying the directory that this file should be in as the first argument, and then the name of this file as the second argument. So the first argument, I'm going to pass in get external cache directory. So the getExternalCacheDirectory method returns a file object, as you see right here, which is another interesting thing about this whole file business. The getExternalCacheDirectory returns a directory, but the representation that it returns it in is a class called file, which is kind of interesting. But either way, it just further reinforces the concept of this whole file abstraction being nothing more than this general idea of some location on your file system. So anyway, the getExternalCacheDirectory will return a directory that points to a location on our external storage that we're able to put temporary files in, basically. And it won't be exposed to other applications. Although, don't assume that getExternalCacheDirectory is protected from other applications. It isn't, as far as the built-in permissions go. And then we have to pass in a name for our temp file, and this will be tempimage.jpg. It really doesn't matter what we use there. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up our on-click listeners, because remember, I want both the button and the avatar view itself to be to respond to a click listener when we press down on either that little note that says tap to change or the avatar itself. I want the avatar chooser dialog to come up. So I'm going to go ahead and first I'll say avatar view dot set on click listener this. Then I'm going to say find view by ID r.id. What did I call that? I think I called that. Actually, I don't think I gave that a name. I might have overlooked that text view. No, I gave it a name called change avatar. So we can go ahead and say change avatar, and then we can say set on click listener, pass in this. Then I'm going to go ahead and put my keyboard cursor on the squigglies, hit Alt Enter down Enter to make this class implement the on-click listener interface. So as you see, what happened here is we now implement the on-click listener, as you see in the class declaration, and we also, at the bottom here, have the actual implemented method here on click. I will change the parameter name to view, however, because I find single-letter parameter names to be gross. Okay, so now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and say if viewed, or I'll go ahead and say int viewID equals view.getID. Then I'm going to say if viewID equals r.id change avatar, or viewID equals r.id.avatar, activity profile avatar that is, then I'm going to say change avatar. So I'm invoking a method that doesn't exist yet. And there's a couple ways we can make this method exist. We could come down here and say private void change avatar if we wanted to. Or if we wanted the IDE to do that for us, we could put our keyboard cursor on the red, hit Alt Enter, and hit Enter. And then hit Enter one more time, and now we have our generated method, change avatar. So I'm delegating the actual logic of the click handlers into their own separate methods, because we'll have other, or we could potentially have other things that need to be an on-click handler. And I don't want the on-click method to get super gross and have the implementation for the click or for each click event to be in this one method, because that would be that would make for some pretty ugly code. Anyway, so we're now on our update avatar method. So we now want to basically show the user a dialog that allows them to select if they want to select an image off their device, or if they want to pick it or take a new image with their camera. And there's actually a really easy way to do this that involving the use of the chooser intent, as well as the ability to query other applications that can handle particular intent. So you guys recall we have this concept of an intent, and intents can either be explicit or implicit. So we've been pretty much only using explicit intents in this entire series, where we say, we have this intent, and we want this intent to go to this specific activity, and we tell it which activity to go to. Well, there's also a concept of an implicit intent, and that is when you describe what it is you want to have happen, but you don't describe the actual activity, or don't point out the exact activity that you want to fulfill that request. And that's an implicit intent, and that allows the user to select which application or which activity in which application they want to have want to handle that particular behavior. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be writing intents that kind of describe what it is we want to have happen, and then we're going to use the special chooser intent to show a system dialog box that'll allow the user to choose which application they want to fulfill the request with. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is the first thing is the first step of this is, it's going to be kind of backwards. The first step is we're not going to be using an implicit intent, but we're kind of going to be using explicit intents implicitly. Okay, I'll just show you the code. The first thing we need to do is we need to get a list of intents that, so I'm going to hit Alt-Enter to import that list class. We need to get a list of intents that can fulfill the request of capturing an image. So we want to get a list of all the intents on this application or on the system that are capable of taking a picture. So I'm going to say other image capture intents equals new array list. Then I'm going to get a list of what are called resolve info. So I'm going to say list resolve info, and I'm going to say other image capture activities equals get package manager dot query intent activities, and then pass in an intent here. So what's going on here? Well, let's go ahead and break this code up a little bit. So I'm going to say that equals that dot. I guess that would probably look better. And then we'll say new intent and pass in a new intent of media store dot action image capture, and then pass in a URI, or sorry, no URI here, pass in 0 for the flags. So what's going on here? Well, first we're instantiating a resize or dynamic array that we can store a list of, or store intents in. We want to store all the intents that can fulfill this particular request. Then we query all of the activities on the system that match a particular intent. So we query every single activity on the system that matches this intent. The intent being media store.action image capture for things like taking pictures. So what we want to do now is we want to loop through all of these activities, and for each one of these activities we want to store a new intent in here. And for each intent that's stored in here, the user gets another choice of another application they can take a picture with. So I'm going to say for resolve info in other image capture activities. And basically here I'm just going to create an intent. So this intent, so again, this resolve info represents an activity on the system that may not even be, or most likely will not be, in the same task or in the same application as what we're in. We're actually reaching over into other applications on the device when doing this. So I'm going to say capture intent equals new intent media store dot action image capture. But now here's where it gets interesting. Again, this isn't going to be an implicit intent. This is going to be an explicit intent where we're going to tell the operating system exactly which activity we want to invoke. So to do that, I'm going to say capture intent dot set class name, and I'm going to set it to what we received from the resolve info. So I'm going to say info.activity info.package name and info.activity info.name, which will be the package name and the class name of this thing that got resolved. The last thing I need to do to this intent is I need to describe or tell it where I want it to place the image that it captures. So when, like, let's say we take a picture, where on the device should that picture activity dump that picture that was just taken? So I'm going to say capture intent dot set put extra. And you guys are already familiar with the concept of extras. The extras are just extra pieces of data that we can pass to the activity that we're launching. Media store dot extra output. And for here, I'm going to pass in a URI. So I'm going to say URI dot from file temp output file. So I'm going to pass in a URI, and I'm going to say URI dot from file to construct a URI to a file. Now, a URI, if you're not familiar, is a uniform resource identifier, and what it allows us to do is it allows us to locate either, basically a URI, a URL, for example, Uniform Resource Locator, is a subset of URIs, for example, and it'll in general take the same sort of syntax. So it can specify a protocol, a path, a domain, etc. Anyway, this particular URI is going to come from a file, and it's going to be a file URI. It's not going to be a web URI. Anyway, now that we've constructed the intent out of the resolve info, we can now add it to our other image capture intent and simply say capture intent. Now we're going to go ahead and create our implicit intent. So these intents that we queried the operating system for are really the ability to take a picture. Now I want to create the pick intent, or the intent that's responsible for selecting an image off of your device. So I'm going to say intent dot select image intent equals new intent, and in this case it's intent action pick. Now this is going to be a implicit intent, and we know it's an implicit intent because we're not going to explicitly specify the class that the activity will resolve to. So we're letting the operating system choose which actual app and which activity and which actual app to invoke. So I'm going to say select image intent dot set type, and this is going to be a MIME type for images. So I'm going to say image slash star to basically tell the operating system, go find me an activity that can pick a image out of it, basically. Then, now I'm going to go ahead and create the chooser intent. So I'm going to say intent chooser equals intent dot create chooser, passing in our target intent, which is going to be our first intent, our select image intent, the implicit one, and then a title, and this is going to be choose avatar. Then, on the chooser intent, I'm going to say chooser.putExtra and pass in intent.extra initial intents, and then I'm going to pass in an array of parsables. Now, intents are parsables. We'll talk about parsables later. You can basically, for now, just think of them as serializable objects that we can stuff into intents. However, I need to convert this list of intents into a list of parsables. So to do that in Java, it's actually pretty straightforward. I'm going to say other image capture intents dot to array, and then I'm going to pass in a new array of parsable other image capture intents dot size. So what's going on here? We're basically passing in we're just changing the type of array to a parsable array instead of a intent array, or intent list rather. We're turning it into an array. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and start our chooser. So I'm going to say start activity for result, because both our image capture intents and our action pick intents are going to return results. Passing in chooser as the intent, and passing in request select image as the request code. So the request code is going to, we haven't defined the request code yet, but the request code is going to allow us to determine which return, from which result we are returning in our onActivity result method. So for the request select image, I'm going to hit Alt-Enter and then select create constant field, request select image, hit Enter, and I'm going to set this to, well, I guess 100. It doesn't really matter what we set it to as long as it's unique. but this will allow us to determine or to respond to that particular result or that particular activity result. All right, so now that I've done that, I want to go ahead and test the code. So let's go ahead and hit run and see what happens. So I'm not going to worry about cropping or responding to these intents just yet. We'll do that here in a second after I make sure this code actually works. Which it won't, because I forgot to hide our progress frame. So let's go ahead and after... I'm going to wait for that to pop up. I'm going to hit cancel. And I'm going to go back into onCreate, and I'm going to go ahead down here at the bottom and say avatar progress frame.set visibility view.gone to tell our progress frame to go away. Now I'll hit play. I'll go ahead and hit OK. So now we have our application. We can go ahead and log in. We can jump over into our profile, and we can tap to change the avatar and check that out. We get our chooser, and it shows up with our camera and our gallery. So if I select camera, for example, it'll show up with the default VM camera, and I'll be able to hit take a picture and accept, and it goes back to our activity. So nothing changed yet, except what did happen in the background is that picture I just took got stuffed into our temp output file. So that's how we'll be able to use it. In addition, we can also select gallery, but in this case, we're not going to have anything to select because there's nothing here in our gallery to select. So yeah, let's go ahead and write the rest of the code here. So the rest of the code, all I want to do is I want to pop open SoundCloud's cropping activity, and I want to respond to that, basically. And then I'll put a to-do there, because we're not going to hook into our web service quite yet. So let's go ahead and get started. So since we want to go ahead and open up our cropping right when we respond to our activity result, right when we get a result back from our image capture or image picking, let's go ahead and actually import that dependency into our project, actually get the SoundCloud library in our project correctly. So how we do that is we jump into our module app build.gradle file, and we come down here to dependencies, and I'm going to add compile com.soundcloud.android:android-crop, and we're going to use version 0.9.10 at AAR. So this just defines a new dependency that we have, and I can hit sync now, and what'll happen is Gradle will pull down that file for us. So that's pretty awesome of it. And now we have SoundCloud's cropping. But there's one more thing we need to do. The open source library that SoundCloud put together, it has an activity inside of it. Now that activity is now part of our application. Even though it comes in as a dependency, it's still part of our application. Meaning, since it's an activity that's part of our application, in order to switch to it, what do we need to do? We need to add it to our manifest. So let's open up our manifest XML file, and let's add that activity in. I'm going to say activity, then I'm going to give it a name of com.soundcloud.android.crop image activity. And you see the autocomplete didn't quite work, but it did stop erroring out once I got that written out in its entirety. But make sure you add that to your manifest. All right, coming back into profile activity, let's go ahead and finish this off because we really only have one more method we need to write. Before we do, I need to add one, or no, I don't. So yeah, let's go ahead and say public override, or override public, void on activity result. Now remember, that's the method that's returned or invoked by the Android operating system when start activity for result finishes. And it takes in a request code, a result code, and an intent data. Now, for onActivityResult, I want to say if the result code does not equal result OK, then I want to go ahead and delete our temp file and exit. So I want to say temp output file dot delete and then return. So it's saying result of file.delete is ignored. That's irrelevant. So basically what I'm saying is if our requesting an image or trying to capture an image, trying to crop an image, if that fails at all, just delete the temp output file and return. Now I want to put in two if statements. The first one is if the result code equals request select image, that means that either our request code, not result code. Thank God Lint saved me again. I was like, why would that code be highlighting as an error? It's like, oh, that's why I used result code and not request code. Okay, if request code equals request select image, that means it's returning from this intent. So we can go ahead and put in our code. Now, what's interesting about this code is we have two conditions. One condition is the user selected an image off of their device, and the other condition is that they just took an image, and that image is now selected in our temp output file. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to create two URIs. I'm going to create a URI for output file and a URI for temp file URI, which is simply going to be URI.fromFile temp output file. Then I'm going to write an if statement that'll detect if the user selected an image off the device or took a picture. So I'm going to say if data does not equal null and open parenthesis data.getAction equals null or not data getAction dot equals media store dot action image capture, then what happened? Then what happened is the user selected an image off the device. So we can get the URI to that image by doing data.getData. Otherwise, the image was our temp file. The user took a picture, which means the picture activity or the picture taking activity dumped a new image file in our temp file location. So I can simply say output file equals temp file URI. Now I need to perform the crop. And that's really easy to do with SoundCloud's API. All I have to do is say new crop, and notice how this is going to import com SoundCloud Android crop. And it's going to need a source image, which is our output file. Then I'm going to use its Fluent API to describe what I want to have happen. I'm going to do dot as square, because like I said, I want my images to be square. Dot output temp file URI, so I want it to dump the output of the crop into our temp file URI. Dot start, and then pass in this. The start method is going to start the new activity, and it needs a activity context for to start a new activity. So by doing dot start, it'll actually start the SoundCloud activity. Now, it's going to, we're not going to see source code here, unfortunately. What it's going to do is it's going to launch that activity. It's going to launch it as a start activity for a result. Meaning, how do I handle once the crop activity is done? How do I handle that? Well, I handle it in my activity on activity result, just like what we did here for our request select image. So to do that, I'm going to add another else if, or an else if here. I'm going to say else if request code equals crop.request code, or request crop, sorry. And I want to go ahead and say equals there. And then here, what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to say to do send temp file URI to server as new avatar. And then in addition, I'm going to go ahead and say avatar view dot set source, or set image rather. And I'm going to set image, and then I'm going to pass in set image URI, and I'm going to pass in temp output file. So that's just URI.fromFile temp output file. So that's just going to set our avatar view to whatever we selected for our avatar. All right, let's go ahead and test this. Let's hit play. Log in, come in here, go to profile, click on that. We'll select out a camera now for this one. We'll select that, we'll hit OK. And what we do is now we get our crop window. So check that out. We get our square crop window where we can select a square here, and I can hit done. And when I hit done, check that out. Our cropped image is now set as our avatar. Of course, it's not sending it anywhere online, but that's okay for right now. Now let's go ahead and test the other case that we have here. So to test the other case where we select from our gallery, I first have to actually go and take a picture. So let's take a picture, open up my camera, take a picture, or take a bunch of pictures, I guess. And now let's check our gallery, see if we have pictures in our gallery. And we do have pictures in our gallery, so that's cool. Now let's go ahead and open up the application again. Say tap to change, select from gallery, and in this case I'm going to select this image right here, and I'm going to go ahead and select that, hit done, and we get our crop. It doesn't look like it cropped quite what I wanted there. Let's try that again. Oh, yeah. I know what's wrong. Basically, what's going on here is because the first time I select an image, it's going to set the image URI. Then the next time I set an image, it's going to set the image URI to the same URI, and it's not going to reload the file. So to fix this, for testing purposes, I can first say avatar view dot set image resource to 0, which will clear out the image entirely, and then set the image URI to the temp output file. So by doing that, we'll now be able to come in here. I really should be launching the profile activity directly. We'll start doing that soon here, because it's getting really annoying having to log in all the time. So let's go ahead and hit done, and we get that. Tap to change, select gallery. Come here, select that image, and then crop it. Let's just do one of those O's there so we can know that it's being set properly. Hit done, and as you see, it works. So it works in both cases, either when we take it from the camera or we take it from the gallery. All right, so that is handling basic images.